Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to have a look at the behind the scenes of episode 1. It lasts roughly about 4 minutes. I'm going to give you my reaction and just my thoughts on what was discussed in it. And of course there's going to be spoilers for the show. The first 3 episodes I could possibly touch upon, so expect that. So make sure you've watched the entirety of the first 3 episodes. And of course there might be some sort of talk of the book series, so I would suggest as well, if you haven't read a huge chunk of the 13, 14, 15 books from the series, you might want to skip this video to a later date. Right, let's get on with it.
The world we get in the Wheel of Time is completely different. We see things that we haven't seen on TV before.
That's true.
Right from episode 1, we start with a bang. We're taking no prisoners with this story. It's hard hitting and it's fierce, and the conflicts are huge right from the word go.
That conflicts are huge from the word go. I kind of disagree with. The way I see it, especially this first episode, this is more like an introduction to the world, to the characters, to the guiding principles, if you want to call them that, of how the world is governed in terms of what is kind of the big players in the world, so to speak. So we get an introduction to the Aes Sedai through the Red Adger, which is an extreme introduction to the White Tower. Then there's of course a very brief mention of the One Power and the craziness that the males get with the use of it. And then we just get a look at the 2 rivers and then the kind of 4 main Tarvaryans that are in the 2 rivers. And yeah, so when it comes to this sort of huge or big conflict from the word go, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think we're going to get that in the first season, no doubt, because obviously already in second episode we've got an introduction to the White Cloaks and how Moiraine goes around dealing with them, taking her Aes Sedai ring off, being very subservient to them to a degree, not to rattle their feathers and be as polite as she can be and answer as truthfully. But for this first episode, I really don't agree with that. I think we've got a huge conflict, yes, between the Trollocs and the village of the 2 rivers and the people that inhabit there, but that's even less of a conflict. That is more of a slaughter. But I suppose if you want to look at it from this point of view, where we're talking about, say, the Aes Sedai against the Shadowspawn, and that's a good versus evil sort of conflict, yes, there's that. There's also the, good versus evil, yin versus yang kind of balance going on between the 2. But yeah, I find it interesting and not necessarily something I agree on with that particular statement, especially in the first episode. And really, in the first 3, there's only that kind of Moiraine and the group she takes with them versus the Shadowspawn. That's what the first 3 are about. And we get introduced to other sorts of places and people and ways of life in the Aiel in that 3rd episode. But yeah, I don't agree with that statement. Let's move on.
In the first episode, we build an entire village, then burn it down. Building the 2 rivers, I feel like, is one of the biggest joys we've all had on making the series of Wheel of Time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think for every single one of us, whether it's the first time we read the books, the first time we listened to the books, or for newcomers to the entirety of the Wheel of Time, the first time watching these episodes, everybody's introduction to the world is through the viewpoint of Emond's Field and the Emond's Field 4, and in particular Rand, especially with the first book. And so this is what brings and groups all of us together, no matter how you absorb that first book, no matter how it is through audio, visual, or reading it or whatever. Emond's Field is that singular point from no matter where you begin your journey is what it starts off as. And so this is very much a nostalgic and feel good part of the Wheel of Time world that we all love because of that. It's the first point of introduction really to the books, minus the prologue, of course. And so I think it all holds a special place in all of our hearts. And so to see this be created, I sure think it looked absolutely beautiful, especially the Alfor farmhouse. When I saw that, I literally went, oh my God. The way I pictured that in the when reading the books was literally spot on when I saw the farm that they've created for the show. So that was really kind of a wow moment for myself. Moving away from that, to build a set and then burn it down within a couple of days as well shows the level of dedication and commitment to this whole series. And so I think this really stems the whole production, and of course the show will go on in good stead for later seasons, because if they're doing that for the first episode of the first season, where they don't necessarily know how the show is going to be received, I think speaks volumes of that.
One of the most important things for us when we approached the adaptation of the books was, how do we do a couple very key things? One of them was to take the first book and make it more of an ensemble piece. The book is very much from Rand's perspective, and for the show, we wanted to see it from all of our characters' perspectives.
So that's interesting, and it's something I agree with. So it's very true. Most of that first book is, seen through the eyes of Rand and his viewpoint and his personal views and opinions on the world and the situation he's in. But of course, if you were to do that and bring it into television, I think that would be a very poor decision to be taken, because I think with how the story is going to progress, obviously through the books and now the TV show, I think it would become extremely obvious as to who the main protagonist from the Emond's Field group is. And just to have the whole story situated around Rand, especially for the show, would make that so blatant. So I think it was something that had to be changed, and I love the way they've gone about it in terms of the way we've got introduced to all the different characters and how their lives are looking like in the Two Rivers. We get Nynaeve viewpoints a lot more than we've gotten in the first book, of her being in wisdom and what that entails, and the sort of things she has to do on a day-to-day basis. And that goes over to the women's circle and the Green and the pub and Rand as well, momentarily there. And then we got a look at Matt and a change in his kind of backstory and just his character in general. And now that was one, by the end of the third episode, I totally was sold on. To begin with, I wasn't. I thought it felt a little bit different. It felt odd to see Matt played in that kind of manner, and just to see his mother and father be completely flipped around into being kind of one a drunk, one a adulterer, and just the way that has the impact it's had on Matt, and obviously his childhood growing up, seeing how his father behaves around other women, doing it so blatantly in front of his wife as well. But by the time of that third episode and what goes on in that, I was really sold on how they'd gone about that. Now for Perrin, that one I really haven't got my head around. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this video because that's not what we're here to discuss in this video. But yeah, I wasn't sold on that, and I didn't think what was used to kind of showcase how Perrin is as a person, I didn't like it too much, and I had no emotional connection that first time watching it either, it felt very odd and strange to me watching that.
One of the big changes we have for the characters in the first episode is aging them up a little bit.
Yeah.
And
I like
that was a very conscious choice on our part. If we had all of our cast members be 17 or 18, if you're watching it, it would read as a much younger show that's not for adult audiences in the same way. And so Perrin has a wife. Egwene and Rand's relationship is much further along and deeper than it is in the books. All of these were choices that we made to age up those characters and have it feel authentic.
So yes, I kind of touched upon a few of these subjects now that Rafe has talked about, and yeah, I actually agree with the aging up, because it's not a dramatic aging up. They're still kind of in the same ballpark. I liked what they did with Rand and Egwene's relationship. I've always thought, even when reading the books, that relationship wasn't necessarily how I felt it should feel to begin with. It didn't feel like an organic kind of evolution of their relationship. They kind of just felt kind of stuck in the way Robert Jordan had written them as a couple, because there was no sexual portion of that relationship, and they're very much, even at the age of 17 or whatever it is in the books, at that age where that is something that's bound to be going on. They're bound to be having sex and all that sort of thing. So it didn't feel right the way that was written. And so seeing that in the show really, I think, was the right choice to go about doing that. He actually mentioned Perrin and his wife. Again, I don't agree with that, so I'm not going to talk about that, as I had briefly talked about that a little bit earlier ago. But on the whole, I do like the fact that they've aged them up. I think it gives them a bit more of a maturity and a bit more independence in terms of the way they kind of will interact with Moiraine, and just some of the themes they will be able to, what's the word here I'm looking for? Utilize, but also explore, will feel less, I suppose the word I'm looking for is weird, in a sense. Some of the things we're gonna no doubt see with like maybe Matt's character. I think you guys know what I'm talking about with Tywin. And so I feel just having them a little bit older, it won't feel as bad as it would have if they were a lot younger. I don't know if me saying what I've just said is the right wording. I hope you all understand what I mean by that. Of course, the subject of that whole Tywin thing is a disgusting thing that happened, and it doesn't really matter what the bloody age is. But I think just having them aged up that little bit more will help make those scenes a little bit more mature, and the characters that are involved in the scenes such as these and I feel the characters would just be able to process what happens to them a little bit better because they're that much more mature than, say, a 17 or 18-year-old. I mean, I can think back and think when I first read those scenes, I did not read it at all like it was playing out. And so, when I went back and read them again, and when I was a little bit older and a bit more wiser and understood what was going on in the world and life in general, that scene read so much different. And I think it just helps to process those scenes, that, like I said, a bit more easily for the characters on screen. I think they'll have a better understanding of what's happened to them than say someone, a younger version of themselves. But yeah, I hope that makes sense and you understand what I mean by that.
For Egwene, there's this huge piece of Two Rivers mythology, which is the idea that all the women there have braids after they're past a certain age. I think that's a good example of how we're trying to approach the adaptation as well, is not creating things whole cloth, but taking something that's right in the books, the idea of a braid ceremony that must exist for these women, and saying, what could that be? What would it look like? And what does it mean emotionally for the characters?
Yeah, so as I've said on many a video on the channel, that was something I loved about the 4 scenes that I saw like 2 weeks ago was that agreeing ceremony, which you've now all been able to see. I loved that because it was a part, as Rafe just said, that we all kind of knew existed, but it was never written or explored upon in the series. And so there's a lot of creative freedom in that portion of the book to make something that felt very authentic to the way of life in the Two Rivers. And I think they hit it right out of the bat tonally, and just the way becoming a woman in the Two Rivers was described and how it felt for them all. And so I think going off of that and then creating a sequence with a braid ceremony, I think was one of the natural progressions to be created and introduced into the TV version of events. And I did love that.
We had about a week of long night shoots doing the big Trolloc battle at the end of episode 1, which is very demanding. And it's difficult doing very, very technical performances at an hour when you should rightly be in bed. There's an extra demand on your body to pull finesse and precision out of it when it's 4:30 in the morning and you're racing to get the shot before the sun comes up.
Yeah.
We had to do the battle scene almost straight off.
So it's interesting, this scene. I said this at the time in my breakdown of the scenes I saw, which was one of the Winter Night ones, that they'd left quite obviously certain portions out from what was shown to the people, including myself, that got to watch this. And one of those was the Perrin and Layla scene. I kind of could tell from the way the shots had been kind of cut and split up, there was like a missing portion from there. But yeah, it was really well done, I think. And I think we got the sense of kind of hectic nature of what a kind of, I wouldn't even call it a battle, a slaughter really, for being honest, to begin with at least, looks like. And then of course we get the introduction of Moraine and Lan into the battle, and then it becomes like a conflict between the light and the dark. I loved everything about that. I loved the way the weaves looked. I think that was one of the things everybody was wondering how they would go about bringing to life for the show. And I think one of the first methods and things they had to decide was, well, the women that were going to be the heirs to die on the show couldn't stand there like stick dolls and not kind of do these hand movements. And I think it was vital for a visual aspect to introduce hand movements into the weaves. It makes it seem a lot more natural than you would if you took it straight from book to the screen. I think that would have looked very weird, very funny, and I think a lot of people would have made absolute jokes out of that. So that was something I loved. But then tackling it from a visual standpoint for us all to see was really interesting as well. I loved the weaves. They seem to not be too intricate, at least to begin with, so people can get an understanding of what it entails to channel and how it goes about, using the one power. But perhaps as we get to more later scenes or seasons and the more complicated weaves begin to be introduced, we're going to then obviously see more complicated visual effects to showcase that to us. But yeah, other than that whole scene was really cool. I loved the chemistry between Moraine and Lan in the scene, as well as obviously between Daniel Henney and Rosamund Pike. They just seemed to be very much connected to one another from both an actor's standpoint, but then of course from characters. Of course that gets portrayed onto the show. And it just was a very natural feel to me, those two actors together.
For Daniel and I, that was really cool. It sort of trained us to be very intuitive of one another's presence.
That's what I just said.
We have to have a very kind of psychic bond.
Yeah.
And a lot of the beautiful chemistry of the battle comes from Lan's dexterous, dynamic sword fighting balanced with Moraine's channeling of the one power. So there's this yin-yang relationship between us all the time, of fast and slow, of brutality and gentleness, of you know, stillness and bursts of energy.
Yeah, I'm not going to stop the video. This is basically what I just spoke about. I love this scene of Glenn rushing to protect Maureen from just
The
dust.
only thing our characters know when they leave the Two Rivers at the end of the pilot is that Moiraine has said they must. And so for these kids, they've just taken this enormous leap of faith in this woman who seems both very exciting but very dangerous. What are Moiraine's intentions?
It's funny how Rafe wants to age them up into the mid-20s, but he still calls them kids. I suppose they're kids in the grand scheme of the world and in the grand scheme of things because they've seen very little of the world, so their knowledge is very much that of a kid's. But when you're at the age of 25, you're not a kid. That's just a funny line there for me.
The way that our imaginations can be unleashed and feast on a production of this scale and scope will be very exciting, I think,
Of
for
course,
people.
definitely. Alright, so that was interesting, everyone. Yeah, there's a few things there was a bit funny. You know, they kind of contradict what was said a little bit before and then afterwards, but it's interesting, enjoyable. I'm looking forward to doing episode 2 and 3 behind the scenes to see what's, you know, mentioned and brought up in there. But yeah, you've made it to the end of the video. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and of course, if you're new around here, please consider subscribing to the channel to see more of these as they become available, and of course for all your real-time latest news and content. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in another video later on.